Welcome to Mastering the Narrative. I'm your host, Josh Machiz from Nasdaq, and it is my pleasure to be joined by Tristan Young, the Chief Marketing Officer for Poshmark. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
Josh, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be here to be able to share and have this discussion.
Absolutely. So Stephen and I are going to take you through the year's best examples of IPOs. And I can't think of a better IPO to start with other than Poshmark. Stephen, I think it's been a millennium since we worked together in January of this year, but would love to just know, what's it been like since you've taken Poshmark public?
You know, it's so funny when you think about that it was just January, but January feels not even just like 10 months ago, it really feels like 2 years ago. But what's really been exciting is that I think, kicking off the year with an IPO really felt like the right way to start the year. And if I could think about all the things that have gone through this past year, right? Even the fact that we were all excited about what the next stage was going to be like for 2021, seeing all these other amazing companies actually go out the gate is incredibly exciting. See how they've also evolved and thought through what an IPO should be like for their customers, for the audience, for the public investors. For us as a business, we've just been really excited to have been able to get to that event. And actually now really has been thinking about how do we operate as a public company? How do we think about the right metrics? How do we think about the right investment opportunities? For me, especially with my team, it's really saying, look, everything we say now has a lot more weight. The things that we invest in, the work that we put out there just carries a lot more than gravitas. And so thinking about that has been really impactful for the team to be able to think about the decisions that we make as far as how we think about our brand, how we want to evolve it, how we think about the categories that we've launched, how we think about the countries that we've just entered. These are all really exciting, I think, big problems that we're trying to solve for the business to help create value. At the same time, it's also things that I think as a public company allows a lot more multidimensional discussions with the team versus really just sort of racing to one point. So I think there's been a lot of personal growth for me as a leader. There's been a lot of growth for my team, not just as marketers, but as marketers for a public company, one that also is really forging ahead in an area that's really exciting. As many of you have probably seen, the resale space has just completely gone, I would say, bonkers this past year with so many other big brands jumping on the bandwagon, and really one helps validate our business model, helps really create and shine a light in our category. And for me, I'm always excited because it's growing our town. And I think that's the most exciting part of what's been happening this past year.
Absolutely. Do you have any kind of lessons that you learned perhaps in the first few quarters of having, certainly I understand you've taken a company public before, but as the CMO of Poshmark in these first few quarters, is there a lesson or two that perhaps you've learned that would be really applicable to some of these late stage companies that are thinking about becoming public companies?
So that's a good question. One area, there's 2 or 3 areas I want to cover on that. One of which is that the narrative that you set for your listing day and for your roadshow really is going to be the narrative you have to live with for the next 1 to 2 years, and really making sure that that's a narrative that you feel comfortable with, because you can say it in a video, you can say it to the investors, but at the end you still have to live with that for the next 2 years, 3 years, as you sort of actually roll out the company and actually meet your targets. Number 2, it's really important to think very, very far ahead and very strategically, right? Because now the challenge for us as a business is to think about each quarter, how we perform, but also think, how am I thinking 2 quarters out, 3 quarters out? And as a leader, I think that's actually the job that I have, is to make sure that the things we're solving for today, we're also thinking about the problems we're going to have, or issues we're going to have in the future that we may need to think about now. Really creates this mindset around stronger strategic planning, which I think a lot of companies, when they're racing to an IPO, aren't thinking about. And number 3, that earnings call creeps up a lot faster than you realize. So really, that's why I said smart strategic planning, thinking about your narrative and how you present the business, but more importantly, also hiring the right people. Because the exciting thing about an IPO is that you have liquidity in your stock. And that is an incredible currency that you can use to attract the kind of talent that you want to help build the business, to grow the business, and to also really, work culturally well with the people who've helped build the business to this date.
So Stephen, I would love to go through a few of these examples of great companies that have gone public this year, of course, starting with yours. So if you could take me through the Poshmark example, because I think you did such a phenomenal job, from the cohesivity of your Times Square takeover to the incredible celebration that you made for your employees and your Poshmark community, to the love letter you wrote to the community, the New York Times, and even the employee gift, which I think a lot of companies seem to overlook the opportunity to really engage their employee base and make them feel like they're an important part of this day. So we just
Yeah.
love your insights into some of the incredible things that you did on Poshmark's listing day.
Definitely. I mean, looking at this just brings back so many memories from this past year. It's just wonderful to see it on slide. So let's first talk about a little bit on the sort of branding and creative strategy. I think this is one where a lot of marketers often, especially for these kinds of days, maybe overthink it, but not think about it clearly as far as like what's in it for the consumer, what's in it for your audience. It's really important when you think about billboard advertising, that brevity of message and then brand messaging is so crystal clear. I can say that the first pass we went through here probably had more messaging than we needed. And I really had to go through and say, listen, y'all, if we want to make the strongest impact, this whole visual has to be cohesive from a color standpoint, from a messaging, as well as who are we going to be featuring, which at the day was basically our sellers and celebrating them. And so I think there's a really important point around when you're developing this creative strategy to really think not just, what do these ad units look like, but how do they look together? How do they look to the user in Times Square? How would they look on the visual when you're actually using a loopback reel? And then really getting that eye of what's going to make the most impact, the most memorable. Because I've seen other companies probably just have one color. I've seen other companies have just the logo, but I do think there is a good middle ground that allows you to celebrate your company, your customers, and your employees without having to sacrifice messaging and creativity on that. And the second point around employee inclusion, I think it was really important when you think about how IPO days normally happen. This is pre-COVID, right? You have an entire set of people that will go to New York City to be in studio, and you'll have another set of people that usually have work in the home office, and it sometimes felt a little disconnected. I would say like my first IPO experience actually was that experience. It was very disconnected, and even the in-office experience itself felt like, okay, we're having some drinks, we're watching stuff on TV. What I think has been really amazing about this whole entire COVID experience and what working with Nasdaq is being able to create an entire sort of program for about 6 hours for employees that run through not just what's happening that day. It's a highlight reel featuring employees as far as like their experiences. It really becomes an inclusive event for everyone to feel like, oh my gosh, I might be a new employee learning about the business, but I'm also an old employee like celebrating the milestone. I think that inclusion experience of having an online virtual experience, although it feels a little, not as tactile, I actually think it's really a wonderful way to be inclusive to your entire employee community, and to some degree also potentially to your leaders, because sometimes leaders, especially in their studio, are so caught up in the day and the emotion that it's hard for them to even think like, hey, are my employees actually having fun? Are my team members actually able to say hi? So I think that this whole experience here is really an ideal one because it also connects everyone. And I think as we look at businesses moving forward, we're going to be virtual hybrid businesses. This might be the way of the future as far as creating these events that still have a component of emotion, have a component of creativity, but once at the end of the day really unites everyone toward one common emotion and a very important milestone. And I want to add on to that working in partnership with Nasdaq, we also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a visual, but it was a tactile experience for employees. And to your point, the swag box was something that we spent a lot of time thinking through, making sure that it was something that if you got, it wasn't, pardon the phrase, a sticker, like, a dongle and some confetti. I think the fact that we created, a celebration moment. This one, by the way, is very much in line with our brand. We celebrate the people. We have a lot of events all around the country. We wanted to bring that DNA of Poshmark into the swag box. I'm so proud about how it came out because I know when my partner started, I was like, oh my God, this makes me want to have a party. And I think for us, that's exactly the emotion you want when you see a swag box. Not just, oh my God, more crap, but it's like, oh, stuff that actually has meaning to that moment in that day. So I think that those are probably opportunities that sometimes people miss because they're not thinking through it and not thinking through the actual experience for the employees themselves. And finally, the one area here that I think that was the most important, and we spent a lot of time thinking through this, was how to integrate our community and how to celebrate them as part of the day. Because obviously the investors are excited, the leaders are excited, employees are excited, but how do you get your customers, the ones who actually help build your business, to really be a part of this? So for us, we had three things. One, we want to make sure that we featured them in our advertising as part of the day, but we feature them in all the marketing. So you'll see a lot of, like I said, for Poshmark, we include a lot of the seller. We interviewed a bunch of other sellers. We created a video just talking to sellers and getting to share like what it means to be part of Poshmark, so that emotion of what it means like to be a customer gets shared across all these different platforms. Secondarily, we also did what they call a directed shares program. We wanted our community to be part of this special day. We gave them access to be able to buy shares at the IPO price and then have the choice of whether they want to hold on to it, sell it, donate it. But I think that one as an experience for a customer is amazing. We had so much great social chatter about people saying, it's wonderful to be part of an IPO day. No, it's not just for the bankers, the investors, but it's actually a part for the community. And I know our CEO Manish was really intent on making sure this happened, and that we also learned about what's the best way to do this. Because I can tell you, there are good practices and best practices and some awkward practices. Trying to educate people who aren't knowledgeable about the public markets as easily to say, here's why the special day is important, here's why you want to be involved in this, and then also using your community to help actually spread the word. And then the final thing that day was really, how do we make a momentous moment even more special? And actually creating a New York Times ad where instead of saying, Poshmark went public, yay, we actually said, let's do something a little bit different. Let's celebrate the community. And we, in partnership with Nasdaq, put together this letter that honestly, creatively, was so wonderful, and it touched so many hearts. I know so many people saw it and were just like, oh my gosh, it felt like in line with our brand, our focus on people, our ability to really connect with our audience, and to be able to even take that moment and instead of making it so corporate, which was the New York Times, actually make it personal and special is something that I know, at the time we were thinking about it, that wasn't the intent. But the fact that we always went back to thinking, how do we make this about the customers? How do we create an experience that's in line with our brand and in line with the constraints that we have so that we can make it memorable and not cookie cutter? On this
Well, I
page,
certainly think you mastered this community engagement angle too, right? You had over 2,000 photos in the Nasdaq Tower, and I know on my LinkedIn, whether I was, connected to the person on LinkedIn, that I was seeing thousands of people kind of sharing their photo from the tower, and not only your employees, but certainly some of your community of Poshers that really were sharing it as well. And I think that inclusivity and bringing your community into the IPO is something very different than many others were able to accomplish.
Definitely. And I have to tell you, I had a whole bag of other ideas I wanted to do, but I know that given the constraints we had during COVID, we still felt like at the end we accomplished what we wanted, which was to make sure that they were part of this day, that it wasn't just something that they heard about in the news, but we actually shared it with them. I know that there were many different, I'll say this, rules, I'm going to say rules, but there were guidelines that were given by the SEC and how we can communicate. But I felt like what I wanted to do was push the envelope. And I know that even our lawyers were sometimes saying, oh, we've never done that before. Doesn't mean it's bad. Can you tell me if it's good? Can we work within the guidelines? And I think as a marketer, that's what you should always be thinking about in this day, is not just following the rules, though they are important, but also thinking like, where are the rules or where are the guidelines, room for interpretation, so that you are able to actually communicate? Because there are, interestingly enough, a lot of actual rules of what you can't do on these days. And I said, but thinking creatively, approaching it with an eye of not rule breaking, but just saying, how do we still create the same message, but actually work within the guidelines to accomplish the intended action?
Absolutely. Well, you did such a phenomenal job, and I can't tell you how many CMOs I've worked with since that say, I want what Poshmark did. I want their employee swag box. Like, all of the things that you did really set such a high bar, particularly in the depths of COVID, to get that much exposure around a listing day. And I think, you were just doing a phenomenal job with Poshmark, but I would love your help in helping me assess some of what other CMOs have helped accomplish on their listing days in terms of their visibility for some of the greatest IPOs that I kind of put together this year in terms of our best of list. So certainly would love your input in terms of being such a master at this and really what we've seen with others. So let's kick this off with Coinbase. So first of all, there are many ways to access the public markets, as we've learned today. You can do something other than a traditional IPO. There's direct listings and SPACs. And often we find that companies not only have to deal with what way they're going to go to the public markets, but how they're going to hone their narrative. And particularly when you're accessing the public markets outside of the traditional IPO method, there's many other things that come into play. Often the conversation around a direct listing can be in many ways a distraction from the narrative that you're trying to push. But in Coinbase's category, I think they just did a phenomenal job of owning their narrative on that day, not just in terms of the kind of overall Times Square takeover that they did, where they kind of painted Times Square Coinbase blue. And I think it was a really powerful moment there for the brand, but also They did a great champagne video, and they were also in COVID, but it was a little bit later days and a little more acceptable to be out in Times Square again.
Yeah.
But I think they did a phenomenal job. And then when you go to some of the tactics they employed, one of the things I found really helpful was the creation of a website. They created a dedicated website to their listing day that was really educational about what it means to go public. Often for the crypto community, it's explaining to them, you know, what does it mean to go public? What is a direct listing? What are some of these things that they need to understand to bring their community into the public markets? They also did a really great giveaway where they gave away Bitcoin on the day. They had a lot of firsts, including doing a co-founder Q&A on Reddit in the lead up to their listing day. And then that kind of full slate of programming, kind of taking, Stephen, from your playbook. I think they did a great job of kind of following suit and really creating a 5 to 6 hour program for their employees.
No, I love, so especially on here, I think the element of the education is something that it was so important, and being able to build a website and then having that as sort of the landing page you want to drive your users to. I know we actually thought about this too. It's just from a timing standpoint, it didn't work out for, like, given everything else that was going on. But I think especially here, what's great is when they think about their audience, when they think about the people who normally think about going public, the fact that it was, there's so many other elements to it that were slightly different than the average sort of IPO. And saying, let's come from a place of learning and education, not from a place of sort of assuming like we're all in on, right? Because I'm sure if I was the marketer, I was like, most people probably don't even understand crypto. They think it's like a very narrow band of people who are interested in it. Let's actually open the kimono and think about it from a education learning standpoint. I think that was a great way of doing this, because otherwise I think most people would have thought, wait, what is this again? And like kind of missing the entire point. Like, this was an incredible moment for the crypto community to actually have a company that comes out and says, like, we're going to be an exchange marketplace for crypto, which is fantastic. And so I think even just that education element and giving it away was even better, because, for most people, they may not want to buy it, but if they can have a chance to win it, it actually gets people involved and want to learn more. Who doesn't want something for free?
Fantastic point. It really was like the coming out day for crypto, and I think that's what they accomplished. So this is one of my favorite listings of the year in terms of the visibility that Whitney and her incredible team helped garner kind of across the public markets. Certainly, as the youngest female CEO in history, she made news across the gamut, not just financial news, but main market news as well. I also thought their Times Square takeover was really fun, and the way they kind of combined the Nasdaq logo and the Bumble logo as if they were kind of apps kind of crossing over was really adorable. But I think one thing that they really mastered was Whitney's ability and her team's thoughtfulness in terms of art direction, in terms of not just the Times Square takeover, but the billboard advertising, but advertising throughout, the city, and then the remote bell in Austin, because while they were also in COVID, in Austin, Texas, they actually had looser guidelines and were able to actually produce a fully produced show from Austin. And so I think they did an incredible job in terms of just the visual identity, and the social content was just really incredible. Stephen, you have anything to add in terms of?
So this one, I love theirs too. Like I said, the art direction was so sophisticated from the get-go that you can tell that there was just so much impact on just that yellow. Like, they didn't just let it sit. They actually allowed it to marinate in all these places, and really not, like I said, just be a yellow, but actually sort of be an emblem about their brand. Now, one thing I want to put on there, and I think this is like an interesting topic, is I remember when I saw this, I was kind of jealous because they actually got to use the Nasdaq table. Josh knows this was something that I had wanted for our business, to be able to like actually have this mobile table that they have in the West Coast. The only constraint we had is it's an incredibly heavy table. Turns out that our building where our office is does not have an elevator that can actually bring a table that heavy. I think it's several thousand pounds. And so
it's thousands of pounds.
And it's not as easily transportable. And I think learning that, you were like, wait, I thought this table is just, you could move it over. But I could say that if you could find a way to actually integrate that, you can have a remote experience with the bell that is just as impactful as being in the studio, and can by default also be even more inclusive. Like I said, we went through so many ideas of like, well, what if we do it outside? What if we do it at a football stadium? What if we do it at the drive-through? Like the fact that you guys have that ability to have this portable table that still signifies the Nasdaq bell and the brand experience, I think is amazing. And I love how they integrated it, because it's something I wish we could have done, but I know that the constraints we had ultimately said, there's different ways that we want to do this, but I think it's one of the best parts about the Nasdaq experience is like this portability of that table.
Absolutely. I think the remote bells are often in my, in many cases, the best case, because it just feels, as you said, so much more inclusive and really feels like you're bringing the Nasdaq experience to your campus and really becomes a part of your identity.
And by the way, the important part of that is I know a lot of founders, to what I'd said earlier, don't want to be disconnected from their employees on this special day. And if there's a certain number of people who are in the studio and a certain number of people are in the city, I think, by the way, that's an incredible decision that you guys all have to make early on in the process, especially when thinking about the IPO. It's that uncomfortable, like, well, who goes to New York and who stays here? And if that's a question I think that you guys have, I think maybe there are creative ways of saying, like, that table will solve the fact that we can all be in the same place. We can all celebrate as a company this incredible milestone. We can all be crying together. And we don't have to separate out. So I just think having that optionality, which I mentioned earlier, is a fantastic part of the program.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to move on to Open Door. I think they did an incredible job, mostly because they weren't an IPO and they also were not a direct listing. But as a SPAC, they were able to really conquer, I think, not only financial press visibility, but overall brand awareness. And I think the reason they were able to do this was similarly to Poshmark. They were in, COVID times, but they managed to really capture a lot of mind share through a lot of really, incredible employee webcasts. But where they really shined was the employee engagement. They had so many thousands of people up on the Nasdaq tower that shared their photos across LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. It was almost, at some points, we thought higher than many other IPOs in terms of just that brand visibility, just because they had this sheer volume of people who are, huge fans of Open Door sharing this across their channels. And I think it was just one of those things that goes to show that you can really create your own visibility. They did get a lot of market coverage, don't get me wrong, but I think their employee engagement and their community engagement really took them over the top.
Yeah, no, especially for, I think, a brand that probably from brand awareness was actually using this as a moment to really introduce themselves to a lot of the country. I think also highlighting your employees, once again, you can never go wrong when you don't just put a logo, right? I think there's a creative approach to it. I think it's being, also a recruitment opportunity to show that we care about our employees, that it's not just about the company and the brand. And I think that for me is one of the things that really stood out in their listing day.
And pretty cool to have the ticker open.
Yeah.
All right. So we're moving on to the next company that I thought did a fantastic job in terms of IPO engagement was the Honest Company. Their team really set an incredible bar. And certainly they were one of the first companies that were back at the market site that we had, in terms of bells where we actually had people in person. Mm-hmm. And while they chose at that time to wear masks, because it was still early on into the stages of vaccination, I thought what they did from an art direction perspective in terms of matching their brand color to the masks, to the look and feel of what everyone was wearing at the bell. Also, Jessica Alba's team did an incredible job with her digital content. There was it was a TikTok of Jessica getting ready in her hotel room, and then she jumps into a dress, and the next thing you know, there's confetti at the bell, and it was exploding. I also think they did a really beautiful job with their branding in Times Square and some of the brand identity elements that they really did to take over the Nasdaq market site.
Yeah, that was one where also when you think about the public awareness of the brand itself, I think just being able to actually highlight the company, not necessarily just the product itself, was one of the highlights for that one.
Absolutely. And then the other thing I just wanted to add was, in addition to everything they did from a content perspective, we also did the show that Machiz participated in as well, called Mission Driven, that I host for NASDAQ, where we really do an 8 to 10 minute feature on the company and help them tell their brand narrative. And what was unique about Honest Company was we actually deployed this asset on their listing day. So we had cut downs for Instagram stories, for LinkedIn, for Facebook, for Instagram, for YouTube. And then we had different pieces for all of the honest companies channels.
Mhm.
And the great thing about this is we can help them tell their brand narrative for them in terms of sustainability and some of the ESG focused messaging that they really wanted to get across, but sometimes gets lost in the financial press messaging of the day. And so, really, what we were able to do is kind of just level up the content for them and really increase that volume of content, particularly for a brand that is so social forward. They had over 1 million views in the first week, and then to date, it now has 7.5 million views. Another one of my favorite IPOs from this past year is Affirm. I think Max, Greg, and their entire team just did such a phenomenal job in terms of thinking about IPO day in a way to really take the brand to the next level. And I think they did that even in the depths of COVID with their broadcast to employees, where they had Max do a really incredible interview with Jack Castle, our head of West Coast listings, and really did a fantastic job in terms of taking over Times Square, their brand and visibility. And then I think where they really shined was the advertising that they did, kind of cross-channel. They really took advantage of all of the assets that were given to them in terms of brand and visibility. They were on every channel from Viacom to television to print to digital. They did a fantastic job of ensuring that everyone not only knew that Affirm was going public, but that they also, perhaps not in the same way that Stephen did, but did a really nice job of creating a pack for employees to make them feel like they were a part of the experience. And I think they did a really fantastic job just in terms of overall brand awareness from an IPO. It's often the thing that most companies want to hone, but sometimes miss out on, is that, nailing that brand messaging and really ensuring that the world knows that you went public. And I think Affirm really nailed that.
Yeah.
So certainly, arguably, one of the best IPOs of the past year was Airbnb. They did an incredible job across the financial media, the news media, but importantly, they did something really special in terms of video production. They created a video where they went around the world with videographers, and this is in the depths of COVID, showcasing them ringing their doorbells and kind of welcoming them home in the way that they're being welcomed home to Nasdaq. And drawing the parallels between doorbells and ringing the bell was such a powerful moment. Stephen, what was your kind of insight into what Airbnb did in terms of their listing day?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I have to tell you that when I saw this one, I was just so moved. One, as a person who loves travel. Two, as a marketer, and just the integration, the thoughtfulness, the quality that they delivered, that it meant so much. You could tell that it meant so much to them to even have this day and to invest this kind of money to develop this kind of content. One, I'm so jealous. I would have loved to have been in all those shoots personally. But I think this is also a really great example where if you have a little bit more time, right, and you're thinking about your IPO process, not with just like 6 months to go, but potentially a year, really using that moment to think, what would I want to invest in? So that if I create some quality content, it becomes a living thing that actually takes on more power the minute you use it. And that it also, by the way, says so much about the business and how you're opening doors and you're connecting to this new financial community. Personally, for Nasdaq, right? Sorry, not for like Airbnb. Last year was such a tough year. Everyone had written them off, and for me, when I saw this, it felt almost like a rebirth, like a phoenix rising. And the way they told the story was just so compelling, even in that really short video. And if you all haven't got a chance to take a look at it, you really should. To me, it was just so well done that I, as a marketer, want to give it so much kudos because it was just so well thought out, and you wish you could have come up with it yourself. But know that I probably don't have the budget. But I think that this is always going to go down as an example of how thoughtful marketing, strategic marketing, and also investments to really help make the brand come to life all create such a momentous day for a company that I know has such an impact on people's lives.
It was truly poetic. And then finally, to wrap things up, I wanted to talk about Sonus's IPO because they did something that I think no one has ever really done before. One of the things that they did was they took the sound of the bell at Nasdaq, and we worked with them, and they hired the Academy Award-winning sound designer for Mad Max Fury Road to rewrite the sound that rings of the Nasdaq bell. And essentially what that sound was these Tibetan bowls with anything that wasn't money. There were chains, they were hitting all sorts of different objects against these bowls to make this sound that is the sound that you hear when the Nasdaq bell rings.
Mm-hmm.
And the press that they were able to garner from kind of putting their stamp on the Nasdaq was one of the most powerful things I've seen any marketer do in terms of taking a company public. They didn't just get, the business and the financial press. They had Good Morning America. They had all sorts of coverage that in many cases people would say, perhaps Sonos doesn't have any business getting press in some of those outlets. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they were able to make that kind of a stamp on an exchange in a way that no one had done before, and it's something we still use to this day, I just think was really incredibly powerful.
Yeah. No, I mean, in this area for me, it's just about that clarity. Once again, if we go back to what we said earlier, your narrative also determines like what part about your business you want to promote, but also what you want about your business to be memorable. And I think for them, it was obviously about the sound. And to me, to be able to invest in something like that is, like I said, everything that we've shown today just outlines you A, why you need really strong marketers in your team if you want to go public, and B, but like how something even that might not be top of mind, such as like a sound bell, can actually come on with a different life, assuming you have the right thought and the right process and the right, leaders who want to support that as well.
Couldn't agree more. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining me and taking our audience through these incredible examples of leading companies that have accessed the public markets in this past year. And thank you for your partnership and your incredible work that you do at Poshmark and with your Posh community.
No, thank you so much to Nasdaq and to GGV for hosting us today. Really, like I said, as a marketer, just as someone who just loves marketing in general, being able to see this and discuss them, you can see how exciting it is. And because I can almost imagine the people that were working behind the scenes and how they were thinking about it. I want to honor all of that great creativity, because the one thing about COVID is that we've all been pushed to the limit. We've all had to think about even new ways of doing things. And to me, that ultimately is what the best part about marketing is looking at it with a different lens and coming up with a different approach and not just copying and pasting. So kudos to everyone that was featured here and to this whole entire amazing group of companies.
It almost makes you want to do it again, Stephen, right?
I know. Right now.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, GGV, for hosting this incredible forum.